My name is Scott Kinney. I'm with Discovery Education. It is my honor to facilitate today's panel discussion with our distinguished guests. The title of this is The New Dream Teams, How Collaboration Between School District Tech and Curriculum Teams Can Transform Teaching and Learning and Improve Student Achievement. Stephen Wakefield came up with that title. It's way too long, so you can blame him on the way out the door. But every year we get a call from GSV who's kind enough to ask us to highlight some incredible district partners that are doing really great work across the country, and it really is an honor today to hear from two of those partners, Virginia Beach in Virginia and Rowan-Salisbury in North Carolina. And I'll do introductions in just a second, but before I do, I just want to set up our discussion a touch today. I've been at Discovery 12 years. My first real job in education, as I always say, was a district instructional technology coordinator for a very small school district in western Pennsylvania. And it was the mid-90s, and I remember my boss at the time was the assistant superintendent of curriculum instruction. And so by the title, instructional technology coordinator, and by the position within the organization, it was always very clear to me that the role of technology was to really support what we know about good instructional practice. And that wasn't the case with every district. I know a lot of my colleagues kind of focused on more of the technology than the instructional side and so on and so forth. And I got really excited one year where I felt like we were crossing this chasm in Pennsylvania because the State Technology Conference and the State Curriculum Conference combined. And they co-hosted the annual conference, and I was really excited about this because I said, what a great message this sends. And I went to the conference in Hershey, and I went to the convention center, and lo and behold, there were two different registrations, and there were two different exhibit floors, and all the textbooks were on one side, and all the educational technology was on the other side, and I thought to myself, we still have a long way to go. And now 20 years later, we still have a long way to go in some districts, but the districts that are with us today do an extraordinary job at marrying that educational technology and the curriculum instruction focus, and they do it because of the expertise of the panelists we have up here today, and always to further student engagement, to further student achievement. And so let me, without further ado, introduce our panelists. So I'll start closest to me, Dr. Donald Robertson, Virginia Beach Schools, 29 years, is that right?
That is correct.
Virginia Beach for 29 years, that's fantastic. And you are the Chief Strategy and Innovation Officer in the Department of Planning, Innovation, and Accountability.
Yeah, I made that title up.
That's a great
true.
title. So
yeah.
what do you do day to day?
Well, so previous to this title, I oversaw student assessment, state accreditation, federal accountability, research and evaluation. But as we went into the journey we're on now, we really need to think outside the box and consider innovation in all the decisions we try to make. And I have a strong background in strategic thinking, so we reimagined the role, and there was no reduction in offices. It was an addition in an office, and I have the pleasure to work closely with Dr. Cashwell, our Chief Academic Officer, and also our Chief Information Officer, our Chief Schools Officer, et cetera, to make sure that we're poised and ready to take the journey that we're on.
Great. And Dr. Cashwell, let me introduce you next. 19 years in education, teacher, assistant principal, currently the Chief Academic Officer and overseeing the Department for Teaching and Learning. So I read your bio, and there was kind of a number of things that fell under that umbrella. I'd love for you to share some of the areas that you oversee in this role.
Sure, I'd be happy to. I have the broad oversight of 5 offices. One of them you would imagine to be in teaching and learning, and the most obvious is around curriculum instruction. And so all of the elementary and secondary curricular programs. So there's an office that handles each of those. I also oversee our Office of Programs for Exceptional Children, which includes our gifted services and our special education services as well. I oversee our Office of Student Support Services, and that office is a conglomerate of things from guidance to our psychologists, social workers, and so a lot of the initiatives around support services are organized through that office. And I also work with the Office of Instructional Technology, and we have a team of instructional technology coordinators and specialists who serve at each of our 86 buildings.
That's great. So I was just going to ask you, 86 buildings, how big is Virginia Beach?
69,000 students.
69,000 students, great. You've met Dr. Morrow, Dr. Julie Morrow. It is her birthday today, if you missed it, if you came in a little bit late. 28 years as a teacher, a principal, transformation coach, now the assistant superintendent of curriculum instruction for Rowan-Salisbury. 28 years in education. Does it give you a different perspective when you think about change? I mean, a lot of what we're going to talk about is how you facilitate and how you collaborate around change and innovation. What is it that kind of lens gives you as it relates to that?
Change is probably one of the most critical components of an education in the organization. We have to continuously change in order to meet the needs of our students and to meet the needs of a changing world. We have to constantly pursue that opportunity for change. Change is exciting and we can't see it as anything but. If we don't continue to change, we get left behind, and if we get left behind, our students get left behind.
That's great. And Rowan-Salisbury, for folks who don't know, where is that in North Carolina? About how big?
That is outside of Charlotte. It's between Charlotte and Greensboro. We are approximately 35 schools, 20,000 students.
Thank you. And we'll go to your colleague, Andrew Smith. Andrew recently named the Chief Strategy Officer for Rowan-Salisbury.
Sure.
Andrew, you have a little lapel pin there.
Yeah,
Am I allowed to say it out loud?
Sure.
It's not that secretive, right? It's a
No,
secret
not-
club, but it's not that
a secret club, yes.
So Andrew was a demon deacon. For Wake Forest, he was the guy in the suit on the ESPN commercial. So I'm always fascinated at his stories around the demon deacon.
Yeah.
But let's get back to the panel. The chief strategy officer, similar title to Donald. Is it a different role as he explained it?
Yeah, so I thought it was interesting when I saw, we actually didn't know each other before this meeting. I thought it was interesting we were both going to be on the panel with a similar title, so I quickly looked up your bio to see what similarities there were. And kind of the running joke around my family and at work is, what exactly does Andrew do? And so it's a bit nebulous. It really, at least my position, involves sitting between technology and curriculum and helping translate some of the pieces from both sides. And so I also like to think that I dip into other departments and try and sit in that gray matter that exists between departments and help take the silos away from even departments like HR and finance. I think that's my ultimate kind of goal in this position, but it is still very new.
That's great. So a bridge.
A bridge, yeah, exactly.
That's fantastic. Yeah, and I think your superintendent, Dr. Moody's in the front row, so if she asks, what does Andrew do, then you're in real trouble, right?
Yes.
And that's
She
the
knows
challenge.
some.
So let's talk a little bit about kind of this marrying of curriculum instruction and technology. What did it look like before in your districts, and what does it look like now? I'd love to kind of get a little bit of a lens of kind of what was the before and what was the after as these are now success stories. So let's start with Virginia Beach. You've been at Virginia Beach for some time. So what was it before and what is it now?
It was definitely, if you think of a traditional siloed model, we had a chief technology officer and he oversaw everything and anything that had to do with technology. And you shared your story earlier about your role as an instructional technology coordinator, a specialist of sorts. And we had some folks evolve in that department over time who sort of had to try to walk the line between instruction and technology, but they really were technology people from the technology department who would come into schools and try to help with instruction, facilitate instruction. And it was always about how might we integrate technology, this thing, into the educational arena, into the curriculum instruction world. How do we find out what the best practices for that are? And so, it seemed like a simple enough task, and you would think that over time, if you put enough resources and time, and that department grew and grew, and the number of devices grew and grew. But what we were doing in schools was largely unchanged, a decade or so into that work. And so, visioning around not only our strategic plan and what we want for students and what those outcomes look like, not just in respect to digital learning, but this idea of creating a space for change and innovation. We knew that technology was not functioning as a driver for that. So we did some realigning, and some of that had to do with taking some of those folks who were meant to be the integrators and moving them into into the Department of Teaching and Learning. And so that Office of Instructional Technology sits within the Department of Teaching and Learning, and we've really worked to create a cohesive feel between what our instructional technology coordinators and our coordinators of science and mathematics and language arts do on an everyday basis, and get away from this idea of you're the specialist in technology, I'm the specialist in content, to making sure they're specialized in both. So that cross-training and loosening the feeling up there. But so that was one of the big bold moves and changes, but then really just breaking down barriers even at the higher levels, which I know is the purpose of today's discussion, but really beginning to work more seamlessly with the Department of Technology.
Did you walk into a classroom one day and realize it just wasn't working, or was this something kind of over a year that you observed, or over some time?
We were, one of our strategic plans was Compass to 2015. So if you think about that as the benchmarking time, we were really beginning to look deeply at how far had we come with things like critical thinking and problem solving and creating these innovative spaces in our classrooms. And while there had been a great deal of movement, particularly in some of our areas around Compass 2015, it was very evident that we had not achieved what we wanted to. We had whiteboards, interactive boards in every single classroom, a good number of devices out in our buildings, and would still walk in to see teachers using it as an overhead projector, and all the things you would cringe and think, oh, there's so much power behind this. And simultaneous to that, we were transitioning superintendents. So a new superintendent was coming in, and that provided that fresh set of eyes to say, gosh, I think we really need to stop and pause and think about what are some of the barriers in the way of these outcomes that we've set for ourselves.
Great. How about Rowan?
We were very isolated and very siloed, as you use that term, and that was even within the curriculum team as well. Everyone stayed in their lanes, is the way I like to, instead of merging in between as we do now. The technology was seen separate from instruction, really, and not seen as an integral part working together as a vehicle. The majority of our team, the majority of our cabinet team is new within the last 4 years. I actually hold veteran status, I think, on our cabinet. We do have some people that are on the cabinet that have been there, but were in different roles. So we've restructured, redefined, and repurposed a lot of what we were doing in order to create a collaborative team that are constantly working together and merging so that we can do what's best for students. You'd ask the question, do we see things differently now, or was there that defining moment? And there was. When you would go into our schools, it was very obvious, and not every child had access to the digital tools. There was not a level playing field. And so we really had to redefine and reorganize in order to create that opportunity for all of our children and for all of our teachers as well. And that meant that we had to create and tear down all the silos and all the walls in order to really work collaboratively as a team to move forward, because you cannot move forward in this work unless you work together as a team.
So you both school systems reorganized. When you reorganize, is there now a measure of success that you're looking for? I mean, as far as outcomes go, what was the hope, and from a measurement perspective, what are you hoping to see from student achievement or student engagement, or what are those things you're looking for?
Well, I'm sure that in Rowan they have a strategic plan that has metrics tied to their strategic plan around student outcomes, and so we have the same in Virginia Beach. But I think the bigger picture for those divisions going on this journey is to have clarity of purpose with all of the key players in the division. So we put some processes in place to help that occur. One of the things that I do as Chief Strategy Officer is I oversee a group we call the Compass Collaborative. Our next strategic plan is called Compass to 2020. And this Compass Collaborative group includes the superintendent, the chief of staff, the chief academic officer, chief human resources officer, chief information officer, chief media and communications officer, and the chief schools officer. And we meet monthly, and our focus is on implementation of the division strategic plan. And we put some processes in place beyond that. We always try to consider who else and what else who else do we need to inform about the work? What else do we need to consider? We've gone through some problem-solving activities as a strategic senior staff to consider and identify who is responsible for the work, who is accountable for the work, who needs to be consulted around the work, and who needs to be informed. And we try to keep these processes occurring so that everyone sees why we're doing what we're doing and how we're doing it. And it provides ownership to everyone in the group. So no longer do I think that people see, well, I have my tasks and responsibilities as the primary thing. It's now we have responsibilities around reaching the goals of the strategic plan, and together we're going to make this happen, and this is what my team can bring to the table.
I think in Rowan, we started off with a strong strategic plan as well. Ours is really based around literacy. It was no surprise to anyone in our community that we weren't doing well in literacy across the board. And so the strategic plan written around that was basically looking just at literacy and how we could increase the outcomes of student reading. And so we've talked a lot about the marriage of curriculum and technology to really increase our literacy skills in our students. And so we couldn't do it without technology. We certainly couldn't do it without the standards as well. So we saw the literacy plan as a really unique opportunity to bring the two departments together as well. One of the things that we would recommend to other districts to help ensure that is we meet as a digital conversion team. And I think I would be remiss if I didn't say that the dream team doesn't just sit right here. It also includes our CTO, Candace Salmon-Hosey, as well. And we meet on a weekly basis for 2 hours every Monday, and we discuss what's going on in the world of curriculum and technology. And that's really allowed us to really stay forward and keep our compass in the north position and make sure that we know what's going on in both departments and that we can really break down those silos by creating a purposeful environment for collaboration.
The other person that sits on that team is the CFO because that is a critical piece. And so, again, we're all working collaboratively in order. And going back to your question, our strategic plan is our driving force. Everything that we do, we constantly hold each other accountable, and we ask that question: is it aligned? Is it aimed towards our number one goal, which is improving literacy? And our literacy goal, we want every student to grow. And currently, we are at 96% of our students showed growth last year on our state assessments. We also have local benchmarks that we use. Our second goal is engaging learning and creating that. We use 4 markers. We call it very affectionately CCRP, and that's collaborative, connected, relevant, and personalized learning. And we've worked to create one voice that defines that. Everyone in our district, including parents and students, and all stakeholders, understand what that looks like, sounds like, and feels like in a classroom and what we're looking for. And that is a driving force of our strategic plan. It is also what we talk about when we have our digital planning meetings on every Monday. We look at that. Okay, is this product? Is this this technology? What we're doing here, is it really driving to provide that in the classrooms for our students and to promote that strong literacy environment?
So I want to open this up to audience questions. So think of a few questions. I have one more, and then we'll turn it over to you, and I have plenty more. I think I could ask you all questions all day long. But I'd love to hear from the audience if you have questions. So let me play devil's advocate here a little bit, because you've used, and I think everybody has used, words like together, collaboration, team. Are these the opposite of accountability? Right, so if you have an entire organization that's rowing in the same direction, and you said it, I think, Dr. Morrow, you actually said we hold each other accountable. Mm-hmm. I'm the superintendent. I want to know who's accountable for something. How do you manage that in this team collaborative environment?
Mm-hmm. We hold each other accountable. Those weekly meetings, when we come in, we are, okay, how did this work? How do we know that it worked? We have very structured components in place to measure that. We are constantly surveying our audience and our users and our stakeholders to determine that level of effectiveness. But again, holding each other accountable in that work. I don't know, and going back to your question, I don't know that without collaboration you have a level of accountability. I think that collaboration creates a stronger level of accountability when you have to hold someone accountable, and you have to look that person every day on our end, but every week in our meetings, and to say, okay, how is it working? Is it doing what we need it to do for our children? And our students are always at the center of everything we do. If it is not what's in the best interest of our children, and I know that we all say that, but we really hold each other accountable in that it doesn't matter if it's really working well for the adults, if it's doing what we need it to do and to create that learning environment for our students. That's what holds us accountable every day in our work.
Okay, so Dr. Spence walks in and says, I want to know who's responsible because this didn't work. What's the right answer?
Yeah, well, I think, Dr. Robertson alluded to earlier this concept of who's responsible, who's accountable, and then, what role do I play in supporting this work? So I think there is, at the end of the day, when there aren't clearly defined roles and responsibilities, someone kind of has to own a project. And when you think about any sort of project management, there is a reality there, and that doesn't mean you do it in a silo. It takes a team, it takes that collaboration to get things accomplished. But at the end of the day, we do assign accountable parties, and one of the things you're accountable to do is not work within your silo, but have consulted with who else needed to know, whose expertise could I leverage. So I think that's important. But to your point, the reality of this, there are some growing pains. I think it's not sort of like we just transitioned overnight. All of a sudden, all those instructional technology folks came over to the office of, teaching and learning, and it was. Everyone was singing Kumbaya. There were some moments of awkwardness and some tension and some trying to figure out who's in whose lane and deferring to the expertise that the folks in the Department of Technology do have that I don't have and can't bring to the table. And so getting comfortable in that space, that when we're having those weekly collaborative meetings and we're working in Compass Collaborative, that we acknowledge each other's strengths and that we play off of those and get comfortable working in a different way. And so, there definitely are some growing pains with that. And I think early on we did have a couple of cases where projects sort of began to sit idle, not for lots of people doing work behind the scenes, but eventually it's like, who owns this? Who's supposed to take it to the next level? Was that you? Was that me? This kind of crosses both of us. This is clearly an instructional issue, and it's clearly a technological issue, and who at the end of the day is going to bring the project home? And so there's definitely a need to stay true to some sort of a structure for accountability.
And I would add three words: ownership, communication, respect. We've tried to create an environment where everyone feels ownership for the work, and to ensure that people understand clarity of purpose, we keep telling ourselves communication, 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 communication. You can't communicate enough. And the other thing is you have to demonstrate and live respect for your colleagues who may have an alternate opinion or a different skill set on the way things should occur. And at the senior level, I think we do a very good job of modeling that. To the point now it's filtered down to our direct reports, who are now modeling some of the same strategies we use to communicate early and often, to be willing to use a reverse gear, to be willing to defer to a different opinion, and still stay connected and owning the work. And so, I think we've made a lot of progress.
One of the strategies we looked at, and we talked about it recently, Dr. Moody mentioned, if you're making a decision at the cabinet level without having discussed it with 3 other people in that room at some point, then you've probably made a decision that may not work out the way you might think it will. Because your perspective, your lens, as we all sit in our different seats, is a bit siloed in just its nature. And so there's a great book, it's called The Medici Effect. It talks about the intersections of perspectives and innovation, and it talks about the vast, I guess it's really the advantage of having multiple perspectives and perspectives on what a problem might be. Because you may be in the law department of the school district, your opinion about that problem may look different than the chief finance officer. So using strategies like making sure you talk to at least 3 people can ensure that you're addressing problems, and you can really hold each other accountable in that way.
We also, on our strategic plan, we go in quarterly and we post that, and we mark how we rate how we're doing so for the public. And that is another level of accountability, because you certainly don't want to mark that you have not done anything in regards to that strategic plan that's posted out there for everyone to see. I mean, those are just minor things, but they're critical in that accountability component.
That's great. All right, questions from the audience. I'm not through here, but I'd love to hear from you if you have questions. Are there anything that on your mind? Yes, sir, in the back. Hi. There's a mic coming. If you wouldn't mind introducing yourself and where you're from.
Good afternoon. My name is Jared McCauley. I work for a charter school system in the Northeast, Uncommon Schools, and I work as a project manager on the IT side, but I interface with our instructional teams a lot. And so I'm really interested, one of the things we're trying to think about is how do we codify effective management of projects, and how do we run these kind of teams that you're describing, these collaboratives, in a way that allows them to hit their goals. And so you've talked a lot about the role of the strategic plan, which sounds, I agree that that's really important. But I'm interested in what are the structures you use within meetings, or the systems you use between meetings to keep everybody on the same page, to hold people accountable to hitting milestones, and to know, to your point about when we post the percentage of progress against the strategic plan on a certain project or initiative, how far you've come.
That's a great question. Thank you for your question.
So I will say that you're probably not going to tell you anything you haven't read before, but it takes clarity of purpose, again, for everyone who's involved with the project. I mean, we use typical structures that I'm sure all of you use. We have regular meetings with established agendas and protocols during the meeting. Minutes are taken. The minutes go back out to the group, and some of the items from the minutes are just informational, and other items from the minutes are tasks to be completed for everyone to see. We are very transparent, just like Rowan, with what we post on our division's website. You can easily see what we're doing and where we're going, as well as how we've done. We regularly communicate with each other via typical methods of communication with email and things like that. So it's just ongoing communication, documentation of the work. One thing that in my particular role, probably very similar to yours, is Dr. Cashwell has 50 things she's trying to work on. My job is to ensure that I'm keeping everyone else informed of what we're doing and how we're doing it, so that everyone understands where we're going.
So a big part of that strategy sounds like you, and in your introduction when you said you're the bridge, I mean, is that part of that communication and ongoing making sure things are getting done? Yeah,
and it goes back to talking about communicate over and over, more than you think you need. One of the strategies I would suggest that I think I've seen works best, it takes more time, and it's talking about being nimble in school districts and innovative. People like to move fast, and so sometimes moving slow to move fast is important. And a program that can help you with that is Gantt charting. So if you're not familiar with Gantt charting, you basically you assign all the duties. There's tons of programs. There are free programs online for this. And line by line, you guess how much time it's going to take. So if you're talking about we're getting ready to roll out 23,000 devices to teachers. So there are specific things that have to be done. There are timelines that have to be met. And a Gantt charting process holds people accountable for those. But it takes time to develop that Gantt chart. And it's not easy, and it's easier just to do it. But sometimes those kind of strategies can help you move faster, especially when you want to scale a project.
Okay, good. Other questions? Yes, ma'am, and then we'll go to the gentleman in front of you.
Hi, I'm Trish Garza from TCM Publishing. I'm curious about what is the role of content providers, third-party providers, kind of people coming in to work with your district. How do they work with your teams? How do they introduce themselves? How do you guys integrate them or not?
Super question. I love that question.
That's a great question. We've done a lot of work within our team in developing a process for working with vendors. Discovery Education has been a huge partner, and that's what we look for with our vendors, is that partnership. How are they going to support? And we really narrow that focus down so that we don't have a lot coming in. Again, we look for what is it? Does their product offer us what we're looking for in our strategic goal? Is it aimed towards the number one goal, which is literacy? We also implemented a vendor vetting process that we use, because you get hit a lot with we've got the best product out there. And so we took it through a rubric, and before we even bring it out to the table. One of the things that we've just recently done, we were looking for a literacy tool. So what we did was, as our curriculum team and our technology team came together to determine, first off, is it meeting the needs of what we're looking for from a curriculum perspective, but is it bringing to the table also the needs for the infrastructure table? Because Candace Hosey would kill me if it didn't, and it was going to create another system of structure. So, and then we narrow that down, and then we bring our teachers to the table. We just had a vendor fair, and so we chose the top 5 vendors from about 20 vendors that we had already narrowed it down, and then they gave us feedback, and then we began to choose from that. We took, 3 years ago, we took a team of 265 teachers to ISTE. We loaded them on buses. I won't even tell you how that worked out, but it was great.
A bus caught on fire.
The bus caught on fire.
There was a
We
pregnant
stayed in
woman on a
cheap
bus that was on fire.
hotels, but it worked. But part of their responsibility in going was that they had to go to the vendor fair, and they had to rate certain the literacy products that we were doing. So we get a lot of feedback. So we go through that whole process every time, and again, we narrow that focus.
I think you brought up a key point, is you have a particular interest or focus that you're looking, a need that you're trying to meet as a district. So, there was a time and a space, I think, particularly with ed tech products, they're just coming out so quickly, and lots of cool factor involved, and our team would be at conferences and all of us getting inundated with emails, and so a lot of times things would come on board because it was amazing, but then there was not really a thought of what is exactly this amazing thing, how is it needed? How is this not cluttering the space for teachers? Is it taking us away from our strategic goals, even though it is amazing as a thing? How does it fit into what we're trying to do? So we're much more strategic now, thinking about where are the gaps that we're trying to fill? What is the need that, what is it we're looking for, a product, a service, a partner to help provide for us? Then we began to do a preliminary search, and then we'll invite people in from there. And then of course getting lots of teacher input once you're narrowing the search and that sort of thing. But being mindful, and sometimes I have to remind myself this as well as other folks on my team. It's sort of like if you make this great purchase at home, for technology, and then find out at Best Buy 2 weeks later there's this neat feature added on to, and you really wish you'd bought that one. But we have to be careful of how much we put in front of teachers, how often, how quickly, is it moving the needle, when and how, and not get distracted by some of those pieces. So I think it's an interesting space to be in, with just the sheer amount of things that are out there.
And I would just add to any vendors that are in the room, what we appreciate and what's a difference maker, and I'll give a shout out to Discovery Education. They are partners with us, with what we're doing. And how do we know that they're partners? Because of the way they interact with us. They are problem solvers with us, versus, we have worked with vendors in the past that we were customers, and as soon as the sale was made, as issues emerged, they were not our partners anymore. And so I'm overwhelmed today with what I have seen out here, and thank goodness Dr. Cashwell didn't let me have coffee till later, because shiny objects were everywhere. And you have to be very strategic about what you bring into the house.
And it sounds like you're speaking a little bit to what does proper procurement look like in the ed tech space. And so proper procurement always starts with a needs assessment. And so you don't go to an ISTE floor, and this is what's tough for teachers, is that we send all these teachers to ISTE, right? And they have no money. They don't have a budget. and they do see all the shiny objects, and they look amazing, and I would love to play on that floor all day long. But really, the proper way to do it so that products are used effectively and so that they don't end up in closets and we're not wasting taxpayer dollars is to start with a proper needs assessment. And have the needs assessment first, understand your need, then go and look for a product. But once again, that takes time. That slows the process down. But it ensures that the money you're spending is well spent and that it's not a waste of time or money in purchasing those products.
One thing we've just done is we've opened a teacher playground in our education forum. That has been amazing, so they can come in and test out some products that we have put in there. And they're very excited about it. Our kids are very excited about it. And it's really kind of a test room to see, will this work too? I mean, we've already vetted, but then they can come in before they order it from a school perspective. And again, I cannot stress enough the collaboration that has to go on between the curriculum world and the tech world, because we made some really critical errors our first year. It was the shiny toy from a curriculum's perspective. And then the tech side would say, whoa, hold up, we'll have to write a script and we'll have to, and that was a whole different language. Now I've learned it, but really, it's very critical that you work collaboratively together.
So Dr. Morrow, I want the teacher playground, because you pre-vet your content or your software or whatever's coming in the door, and then you have your playground. What if a teacher starts to use, and I don't want to pick on anybody, like a Remind, or just kind of find something online and starts to use it in a classroom? Do you just not allow that, or what does that look like? How do things bubble up, which is, frankly, a lot of folks at this conference have a bubble up strategy.
Yeah. And I'm going to give Andrew some great credit. This was his brainchild, but again, nobody in our organization, we work together collaboratively. It's not just, he may have the idea, but it takes all of us to pull it together. But with this, I mean, since he really started this whole process, he can kind of talk through that.
I think that we try to say yes as much as possible.
Yes.
But we have to help. Sometimes our teachers can get themselves into trouble. And so we have to educate our teachers on what they really can do and what you can't do. And so if you think it's acceptable to use a new product, maybe like Snapchat in a classroom, we need to educate them on what does that really mean. And sometimes it's not as obvious. So we do have what I would call like a site-based style of procurement, meaning that you could come up with something on your own. An end user could say, I saw this really cool product, it's free, I'm just going to try it in my classroom. And for the most part, we're not going to squash that kind of innovation. But a lot of times that bubbles up. We've had products, one that we recently purchased, that was a product of our end users, our teachers, who were like, this is an amazing product, please take a look at this. Tell us if it works. Tell us if we could get it as a district. But there are also times, like in the playground, where we're suggesting the newest things possible. And so if you're an ed tech person here and you'd like to get your product in front of thousands of teachers, we'd love to have you in our playground.
And give you some
feedback on that. But there's lots of different styles of procurement, and you kind of have to think about your systems and how you address those.
Very good, thank you. Gentlemen, did you still have a question right there? Yep. Sorry, with the lights, I can't even see what color your coat is, so I would say gentleman in the brown coat. Or
I'm colorblind, so I couldn't tell you. Hello.
Yep.
Very similar question. Just I'm with a company that provides services to districts, and if we walk into a district that doesn't have or that does have silos, that isn't quite as united as you folks, what can we do to help that conversation to happen so that there isn't a block on one side or the other?
I think asking the right questions is always critical in any role. And asking, have you questions that will, and Discovery Ed has been amazing in helping us to even work together. I know when we first started, one of the things was they asked the right questions of our media and our tech facilitators. We have tech facilitators in every school that are really, they work with teachers and they design and they're coaches for the technology. And then we had our media specialists. And so Discovery Ed began to ask the right questions, got them in the same room and began. And that's a simple example, but I think it is critical for the vendors too, to just help teams to work together so that they can bring them around the table and asking the right questions so that and you think, oh yeah, I need to bring such and such to the table so that we have a better understanding, then we know that this will be that will work and meet the needs of our students.
I would say a bit of reconnaissance is needed. So taking a peek at the organizational chart will help you understand if they're really in silos. Look for where the instructional tech person is. Are they underneath one or another umbrella? Are they in the middle? And then I just ask good questions about who helps make decisions. And so you might talk to other vendors, maybe if they're not particularly in your niche, but in a different niche, you could ask them how they've gotten their products through. So I would say check the departments out pretty well to see if silos exist.
So Dr. Cashwell, you mentioned, not everything was harmonious as you made this shift, and I think role clarity sounded like one problem. What were some of the other challenges you ran into as you kind of merged these two groups together?
I think some of the similar challenges around even just product acquisition. So, curriculum folks running too far and too fast with something, and the technology folks saying, whoa, you didn't realize, what about security, privacy, student data privacy, all of these things, and trying to work through some of those and trying to find establishing processes and what does it look like and what's the proper approval path to make sure everyone's voice is heard, and really putting those systems into place. And so I would say that was certainly a challenge, and I think there were at times competing interests and ideas that would surface, and so it would seem oftentimes in the beginning that we were lacking that clarity of purpose. And so sometimes the folks, the instructional tech folks who moved over to the teaching and learning side felt torn between two offices and two departments because they knew there were strategic initiatives in the technology world and trying to get teachers used to devices, yet they had competing interests with being able to coach and mentor and model for teachers, and so we would find that we would have fractions in groups, sort of picking an initiative because they didn't have clarity around it, and so we really had to unify the work by bringing some clarity in any way, in every way we can. So.
Did it impact the classroom teachers? So certainly it impacted lots of people. Is it all upside to a classroom teacher? Do they not know this is happening in the background? I mean, talk about their experience.
Our classroom teachers did, and particularly because in the beginning they had been used to, teachers who had been in the system for a decade or more remembered when these roles were originally imagined, and we had, they were named computer resource specialists at the time, but that was the person they ran to network their printer, and the bulb went out on their smart board, and they didn't understand how to get their email or how to access the new digital curriculum and so they had these habits formed right at the building level. So we imagined a redesign in the central office, but then we had to really think through, and we use a critical path format, on our critical path, and thinking of all the time this will take, what's the messaging and what's the right support we need to give our schools as they make this shift individually. And so really had to do a lot to help with those pains in the schools, because a lot of those instructional technology folks, even though we did a lot to market and message their new role and the purpose, and then we brought in some folks to handle the tech troubleshooting side, some non-instructional personnel to handle that, old habits die hard. And so our building leaders had to really be on board with helping message and shift. And so we knew that we needed to do more up front than we had done when we made that initial shift, more than just notifying principals and explaining, and everybody was like, yeah, this sounds great, and the instructional specialist, this sounds great. But then once it was operationalized in the buildings, there were some growing pains that first September to October, and our instructional technology specialists didn't want to tell teachers no. So they were trying to network printers and model and co-teach and create lesson plans, and and they just couldn't keep up with it all. And then principals were pulling their hair out, and we had some frustration, so we had to use that reverse gear Dr. Robertson talked about and sit back and rethink and again make sure they had the supports they needed. So
great. All right, so I have a question for each of you. Andrew, same question.
Okay.
I'm going to start with you though.
Okay.
Dr. Robertson, plenty of time to think about it. What's the one thing you would have done differently as you brought collaboration across these two groups? What would you have changed?
I don't. We talked about this. We kind of knew this question was coming.
Thanks for blowing it. I mean, it's supposed to be an impromptu.
I really wouldn't say. I mean, We've had our ups and downs. I think when we first started, we were all in each other's business, and the lanes were blurred, and we were like going from the right lane all the way across 4 lanes to the left lane, and everybody was everywhere. But that was kind of the time that we got to know each other, and so I don't know that I have a thing that we would say we would, at least in my opinion, that I would do different. I think for us it was kind of everything just came together at once.
Maybe a different bus on the way to ISD, perhaps.
Maybe a different bus that didn't break down in
Different
Virginia.
hotel. Yeah.
Anything to add, Dr. Morrow?
No, and I think it's critical. I wouldn't change anything because the path that we took really led us to new discoveries and to that change. It created a level of disequilibrium among our team and uncertainty, but that pushed us to that next level. So I don't know that there would be anything that I would change. Some people have said, you guys went so fast, so quick, and I don't think that that's even possible. I think we have to continually go fast in order to roll out and implement the change that's necessary to meet the needs of our students. So really and truthfully, I think with, like Andrew, it was some of that uncomfortable time and that disequilibrium that actually has created a stronger team that really has created that dream team.
Oh, great. Dr. Cashwell, anything you change?
I would echo all the sentiments that were just shared about that disequilibrium and the power of that, even though you might at first glance think there's got to be a way to go back and change some of that uncomfortable time, but it's really for the better, and I think it moves things forward. But I think for me, being reflective on the situation, particularly in a really large organization, we've talked a lot about that central team and whether you're chief officers or the heads of departments. Most of us have a pretty core integral team that we work with in the individual departments. And I'm not sure when we set out on this journey that we were as clear to all of those groups all the way down throughout the organization. I think it was really clear at the senior staff level or cabinet level, but how did we then go back and work with our immediate teams of directors across departments to make that message clear in the beginning? I think they felt like they could sense things were different and they knew they were different, and we were encouraging collaboration, and they might have been at the table, but I don't think they saw the vision for it as clearly as they could have in the beginning. I think if we had done a better job at the central level of helping shape that vision among each of our departments and doing some collaboration that way. They kind of found their own way, luckily, and maybe they would go back and say they wouldn't want that changed because that helped their roles as well. But that's one thing I would do differently.
Thank you.
And, we have not talked about this, but it's interesting. I would have answered the question the same way. I think early on, we missed some opportunities with communication to go more broadly and more deeply down to the end user. But in the end, it turned out to be a win because people recognized the need to be informed more. So then when we started our communication campaign, kind of ramped it up, people were sucking in the information. So it actually turned into a win to where now people are looking for that information so they can be a part of where we're going because they were missing it at the beginning.
Great. Well, thank you. At the beginning of this, Dr. Morrow said to me, happy to be here. This is a real story, and I wrote it down, and it's still unfolding. Mm-hmm. So hopefully we'll get to hear more of the stories. But thank you so much for sharing your stories today. Thanks for what you do for kids every day. Please join me in thanking our panelists today.